inviting me to attend the first Abdul Kalam conference on sustainable development at sustainable cost. I'm sorry I cannot be there in person. However, I did want to talk about primarily rural development. There are so many initiatives about urban development, smart cities, SCZs, for example. But I think the real foundation and a challenge in India is rural development. Title of my presentation is Repositioning of Rural Development in India, from Mirage to Miracle. Efforts have been made for rural development all over the world by a number of international agencies. In India, we even have a Ministry for Rural Development. And so the efforts so far have had mixed results. So this presentation is to really think out of the box, somewhat different perspectives than the typical policy perspective or economic perspective. And therefore, we might give some ideas in the process that might be helpful to all of us. First question is why rural development is critical. And I've identified 4 reasons. The first main reason is that the urban cities cannot absorb any more population migrating from rural India to urban India. This is the problem in China that people have faced. Rural interior Chinese migrating all to the coastal cities like Shanghai and others and clogging the whole thing. They had to put even a visa requirement within the country to enter into, like a passport and a visa. And of course, the problem of pollution and environmental degradation simply rises. We create urban slums in the process, and therefore it's not a tenable alternative. It is not a win-win situation, it is a loss-loss situation. And the growth of slums in Brazil and in South Africa is incredible. When you visit them, you can't realize how large, basically almost subcities, suburbs almost, of very large metro areas, whether it's Johannesburg on the one hand or Rio de Janeiro on the other hand. Surprisingly, in the urban population, discretionary income is less. While your income may be high, the cost of living also is equally high, and therefore there is no cash flow at the end of the way. You are in a debt in the process. Just to give an example, and I may repeat this example one more time because it is so interesting. A crane operator in the port of Mundra in Kutch, Gujarat, earns about 65 to 70,000 rupees a month. So does a software engineer graduating fresh after 10 plus 2 plus 3. He or she also earns about 65,000 in Bangalore. But the software engineer has to pay, as a paying guest alone, 15 to 20,000 rupees a month rent. He is, of course, very cosmopolite. You have to go and spend time in the evening with girlfriends and boyfriends. Go to the clubs, for example. Your spending habits are very different, and therefore at the end of the month, they are in debt. The rural crane operator in Mundra actually has savings. Usually, typically is married, has only 10 plus 2 vocational training, lives with the parents, there is no rent. There is a wife who takes care of the household chores. His discretionary income is quite a lot, and often he ends up buying a motorcycle, for example, to commute properly, saving money for the child and his or her education. So there's a huge difference between discretionary income versus actual income between urban and rural population. As people migrate from rural to metro or urban areas, we have seen enormous exploitation in urban cities, whether that's human trafficking on the one hand or domestic help and abuse in terms of domestic help, whatever they are, or labor abuse as I call it. And the last and very important point is that rural population has a lot more potential and sustainability. We have seen this kind of a transformation in rural Gujarat. Rajasthan, we have seen the same thing. And therefore, one has to really think as to why it is possible and what can we do. The old theory used to be think global, act global. We changed to say think global, act local, local as it is called. But the new theory that we are advocating in rural development is think local, act global in many ways. And I will show you some of the results in terms of recommendations. I find fascinating when I looked at the facts and figures about rural India. 66% or 880 million people in India live in what is defined as a rural area. Rural area is usually defined by the government as less than 5,000 population in that geography, less than 400 people per square kilometer, and more than 75% of male working population working in agriculture. Rural households spend about 1,500 rupees per month, or about $25 US calculation, in contrast to urban households who spend about rupees 3,000, twice as much the rural population. However, as I mentioned, there is much greater discretionary income as well as savings, surprisingly, among rural households than among the urban households. Rural India contributes about 46% of the country's GDP. It's about $1.2 trillion in the latest statistics. On a purchasing power parity basis, rural India contributes even more because rural PPP, cost of living is low in many regards to buy the same products and services, is 1/3 less than urban PPP, especially on the services side where you buy things, you get people to help you. There is a McDonald's Big Mac index created by The Economist. It's a fun statistic. So if you take the Big Mac index on purchasing power parity or equality between geographies, the US retail price is about rupees 175 or $3.60 per Mac. It is rupees 57 in urban India and only rupees 40 in rural India. The PPP multiple of Big Mac in rural India is therefore 4.5 times, which means it is 4.5 times undervalued in many ways for the same market basket of goods and services. So nation's GDP growth will be much greater by focusing on rural PPP than all PPP or urban PPP at least. So rural development may be more interesting in terms of providing higher growth rates for the India's GDP. There are dozens and dozens of government assistance programs. I was amazed how much subsidization we do for the rural population. They range from guaranteed employment for 100 days, which is the latest one we have done, self-employment and self-skill investment in those, housing loans for all, and subsidized water and energy. Ministry of Rural Development budget has been increasing each year. It is currently at rupees 112,000 crores, nearly rupees 1,300 per month per household. Remember, 1,500 is the spending, which means most of that comes from subsidies. Most of the government-based rural development efforts have had limited impact on the rural population or on Indian economy. There may be a bunch of reasons, explanations, whether there's a leakage in the system, does it reach to the poor properly? We can understand all that one. But the question is that we spend enormous money and get no results out of that money. It's not as much outcome-based spending as we would like to have. So my view is that the only way out is to discard traditional theories and thinking about rural development and think differently. And hence I've made the chart which says repositioning rural development. So what are the dimensions of repositioning? From subsidized development, the theory of subsidizing, which says I'll constantly feed you fish rather than make you learn how to do fishing. from subsidized development, what can we do, what kinds of programs, tactics we can have so that it is sustainable development, self-sufficient, self-reliant economy or community. And the other dimension, very important, is that the purchasing power rural population has is primarily with unbranded products and with unorganized retail structure, with a strong faith-based and socio-political governance mechanism. It's basically not as efficient. How can we make unorganized markets into organized markets? So rural India has the size in total aggregate numbers, but does not have the scale. And scale is where you can make more affordable products because of economies of scale concepts. Therefore, it needs to shift from unbranded street foods primarily to branded products and consumption, and from unorganized to organized retailing or distribution. So what are the strategies? I've identified 10 strategies. I'm sure this is not an exhaustive list, but this list is comprehensive enough. Even a few initiatives I think will move us along in rural development. The first one is my favorite, and that is develop rural cooperatives. We have already shown it works well in India. Amul Dairy Cooperative, it's a marketing brand. The farmers, the average cow herder has ownership of about 2.5 cows, under 3 cows. They use the public land quite a lot, surprisingly, for grazing. There is no cost really. Twice a day they go and provide the milk to the dairy. Milk is processed, they get payments in cash. How would they make the payment? And interestingly, they own the brand name. Every farmer, 65, 70,000, maybe more now, is wealthy. So the whole notion of creating per capita income as a measure is not good enough, which is the old theory. How can we make poor wealthy is very important. And Amul has already shown it can be done, and it is not the only milk cooperative. There are many other milk cooperatives. It happens with dairy products, but also with non-dairy farming products. Wealth creation is very important, as I mentioned, in addition to income generation. And as I mentioned, it is not limited to dairy. One can have cooperative of fruits, fish, or flowers. Doesn't make any difference. Whatever the land creates at that time, it's a question of creating aggregation and efficiency more than anything else. But the ownership should not be a third party. It is the grower who is the owner of the enterprise. And surprisingly, it is very affordable to do. Surprisingly, there have been cooperatives in America in the agricultural days. Those are the orange grove cooperatives. Cranberry juice people have cooperatives. They know how to do branding. They don't know how to aggregate and source it and create a scale. All those typical things that we do in terms of branded consumption is possible. I think it's very doable in India. And many of these brands actually can become globally accepted. Latest fashion is that you go back to what the rural population consumes and make them into fashionable products for the world to consume. Fascinating. Second area is value-added agriculture, which means don't make agriculture the typical low-priced, low-margin commodity, but can we have a higher valued crop on the same land by thinking differently? The biggest area is organic foods. One of my former students, who is based in Mumbai, actually has now 10,000 farmers in India, all doing organic farming. And he is able to aggregate and source it and supply to large corporations all over the world, whether it's a Carrefour in France, for example, or Walmart, for example, or Whole Foods, whatever they are, their organic food is, or organic produce or farm products is important. The whole supply chain is built. is such a small one person. One can clone more of these people in India. It's very possible, either by market process or through incentives. I have seen places where some smart entrepreneurs in India, more for social enterprise, actually collect local farmers' products in a city. They're all in the outskirts. Have them cut in a warehouse, put it in a package, street vending, but it's packaged, not loose, and offer those for salads, for carrots, or whatever they are. If it can be done on carrot and on salad, it can be done on any product. It can be done on fruits, it can be done on fish, whatever. It's basically additional packaging, making quality assurance. That's all value add. And the farmer does not have to do it. It can be done by some sort of, again, a cooperative of farmers, which is what this social entrepreneur does, where most of the money goes back to the farmer. Third is sustainable supply chain. This is very prevalent in Latin America, in Africa, what is called the fair trade. So companies like Starbucks have put fair trade practices for the coffee growers. It's a very key, essential ingredient for Starbucks' own future and survival. If you have no access to coffee beans, you cannot make coffee. It's that simple. India is very big in tea. It's very big in many of the commodities, where the ultimate marketer makes money, and the share of that price in the marketplace, how much farmer gets, does he or she get fair share, and fair trade has become very acceptable practice even in India now. I would strongly, in fact, say fair trade as a policy even would be very important in India to encourage people to do it. I also think farming can be modernized on existing equipment. It is not like becoming a mechanized farming as it happened in America 100 years ago or so, but I'm talking about using the same technology but teaching know-how a little better so the farmer is more productive. I am told that today Vietnam also produces cashew nuts. Remember, cashew nuts, India had a monopoly in the world. Today, cashew nuts are made in Vietnam, but per acre it is 6 times more productive because they have accepted modern farming. We do have the whole program called agricultural extensions. Every land-grant university in America has an agricultural extension investing into local farmers and making them understand that they can actually produce better, more, not only just educating but training them. And the last area that's very possible is to have farm to fork. Through my institute, India, China, America Institute, I remember in 2007 or 8, with the help of USAID and of course Agriculture Department, through University of Illinois, we hosted the whole conference on farm to fork, avoiding as many middlemen as possible. And India, like many emerging countries, usually has 7 to 8 middlemen from the producer to the consumer, and each one creates efficiency, each one needs a margin, each one has a warehousing holding. How can you compress that by going direct to the consumer, or maybe one-step distribution or two-step, as it happens with e-commerce, for example, or it happens with large chains like Flipkart on the one hand, Futures Group or the Big Bazaar on the other hand, whatever they are in India. So that's farm to fork is a very key area. Number 4, diversify local economy. If it is too much agriculture dependent, then you are at the mercy of monsoons. So you have a feast and a famine. If you have a diversified economy, one can survive at least in the short run if you have a famine, for example. So there are lots of known farming services. Cellular telephone has clearly shown that one can have a little shop. We have the typical chaiwalas, but we can do a lot more than chaiwalas. Little more value add, more into modern technologies, selling consumer electronics, for example. Everybody wants consumer electronics, everybody wants cell phones, everybody wants SIM cards, whatever they are. And it has been shown in India that it works at the same time because the labor cost is so low that one can afford to have a whole system in place. I remember many, many years ago, the whole process of providing long distance, STD, TDS, whatever they call them, out in rural population. And people will call with excitement in the remotest part of India, they could make a long distance call all the way to America. Today, with cellular telephone, I can be anywhere. Huge opportunity. So I do believe that tourism is another place which can be invested. Jaipur rugs is a famous case study where they employ almost 40,000 artisans, train them how to make rugs. Actually, they provide looms as a shared technology or a shared machinery, I guess, and they sell the product in the rest of the world, not just in India. And many street foods can be easily ramped up into more packaged, value-added branded products. If Haldirams can do it, anybody else can do it, is my view. Next area is very controversial probably. I believe there are two fundamental rights of human beings, health and education. And I don't think governments are the agencies to do a good job. While government schools are everywhere, we know in India the statistics are pretty troubling. More than 50% of these teachers don't show up to the class. They're just getting a check. Students are not there. Sanitation facilities are not good. To me, this is one place where government actually supports an NGO who has a mission-driven view, much better process. So can NGOs become the education and healthcare provider in India, and government provides the support to the NGOs to get the job done? With good NGOs, I think it can be done. We have shown NGOs do a great job in the Western world. American Red Cross as an example, CARE as an example, because they don't have a profit motive. Hopefully, this transformation or coexistence of NGO-based education, NGOs-based medical services, it is very common among faith-based organizations, whether those faiths are Hinduism or Islam or Christianity or Jains, Sikh, that makes no difference. So I think this can be very much incorporated as a parallel system, complementary, but eventually substituting where they are the primary provider of education and healthcare, and government is a secondary as a backup system. Point number 6, certified vocational skills and training. This is just upgrading the human potential or talent. Truck operators. There are plenty of truck operators, but how can we make them, besides just driving and getting a license, much more contemporary? Rural BPOs now doing quite well. I remember a case study where there was one entrepreneur in India, Ganesh is his name, who actually provided online tutoring to American and European high school kids for math and science. And I was amazed that his teachers were based in India, mostly in second tier, third tier towns. There's a huge talent of teachers, quite dedicated. And they are able to tutor the most advanced country high school kids. Why can't we leverage that? So rural BPO is the next excitement, because urban BPOs like Bombay, Delhi, and Chennai, and Bangalore, turnover is enormous. It's a transitional job there. You can't afford a salary of BPO to survive. Here, it turns out that it can be done. Livelihood is decent, and there is an economic viable proposition both for the entrepreneur who starts the rural BPO. So what if I can have 100 of these rural BPOs in one geography alone, or I can have thousands of these BPOs? Why not? It can be done. It's very practical. And to me, somebody will figure out how to do it. And it may be even possible that the government incentivizes to do it, which is just as we have done with software parks, it can be done with rural BPOs. It upgrades the skill level. That's a very important one. Like NIIT did in the urban areas, for example, or Aspect has done. Phenomenal. NIIT probably has trained millions of people over time. Think about the size and the scale potential in rural population. And today technology is so affordable that it can be done easier, much easier than we have realized. Plumbing, electricity are another area. I do believe that making vocational jobs respectful is the most important problem. Unfortunately, in India, we have this caste system by education also. Unless you have a traditional degree, you are not respected in the society. Manual work is not respected. We very much respect the intellectual work, cerebral things. If the society can accept manual labor as very respected in the society, and the only way that will happen is by increasing their wages, as we respect billionaires and millionaires. If they are well-to-do people, we will always look upon them with admiration, with respect. So my view is that around here, how can we motivate society to respect rural population and their skills? As we are beginning to respect the military, Jawans. In India, we never paid attention to Jawans. And of course, military always has been the backbone for providing skills to everybody. Most of the retired military people join private practice. In America, it's very common, as it should be common in other places. So I think there's a whole area of opportunity in terms of creating this, upgrading the skill level by certification. I also believe that we have so much of CSR money, 2% tax on income or profit, across such large number of companies, private limited, small companies to large multinationals. My estimates are running that it may be generating $5 billion of cash flow. Is it possible to have the government motivate CSR money to channel itself toward rural vocational technical training? I think it's doable. Point number 7. Rural population definitely needs rural internet, or universal service as we call it. I think it's very doable today with the new 4G and 5G eventually. But 4G is the threshold for data communication primarily, high-speed data communication. And today wireless technology it allows. Reliance Jio has been able to show in India they can reach anywhere in the India on a pan-Indian architecture. And the prices are low, very affordable. So affordability and accessibility are created. To me, if there is any one way rural population will have a revolutionary change rather than an evolutionary change, is going to be the digital technology. We have seen this in Kenya with M-Pesa. We have seen this in China. All emerging economies, by leapfrogging traditional evolution from legacy systems to laptops or personal computers to cell phones, by going straight to the cell phone, payment platforms like Paytm in India or M-Pesa in Kenya, as I mentioned, all of these are very possible. In the remotest parts of the country, one can have the most modern technology today, especially in the digital world. And marketplace exchanges can be created where the local community is the supplier, not just the buyer of products. And their products can go not just in the local market through the middlemen, etc., but can go on a global market. So think local, act global can happen with a digitization of the rural population, and of course, along with digital network, digital internet, one needs also digital literacy. So if we can have digital literacy and the rural internet, I think one can create a spark and one can create a exponential growth almost on an economic basis and maybe even a social change. I do believe that government should incentivize to shift the rural economy from highly unorganized, adulterated products dependent on a key set of gatekeepers in the market to making into organized retailing and offering only branded products. It is happening in some of the cell phones are all branded, consumer electronics products are all branded. Why can't we do that with foods? I'm quite surprised and quite pleased that any part of the country today I can get bottled water. Bisleri is everywhere. Think about 15, 20 years ago. Bisleri was strictly in the metro area, but today I can get it anywhere. So given that situation, like Coca-Cola has done it, Pepsi has done it, they're all in rural India. So is ITC in cigarettes, for example, Brook Bond in tea. Marketer always has been there, but can we make sure it is branded products as opposed to unbranded, unsanitary products and organized retailing? And if the government needs to give incentives, I think it's appropriate to create that spark. Point number 9. Entrepreneurship is probably the most strategic advantage of a nation. To me, an entrepreneurial nation always does better. It is the true DNA of India. And entrepreneurship does not recognize literacy. Most illiterate people are as entrepreneurial as literate. Does not recognize gender. Women are as entrepreneurial or better actually in Bangladesh, they have shown, as compared to men. Entrepreneurship does not recognize age, young or old. Faith, any faith has entrepreneurs. It is a universal force and the real advantage of a nation. How can we use that entrepreneurial DNA of the nation primarily for focusing on not just arts and culture and all the stuff, but on livelihood-based entrepreneurship? Homemade products. In the urban markets, we do that with pickles and papad, as we call it in Gujarati language. Spices are done the same way. We do have, in fact, people who make garments and they're sold in the international market by NGOs like Seva, for example. We have the Grameen Bank experience in Bangladesh, also replicated in India. And one can really create more technology-centric daily activities. Fintech can be done anywhere. And we do have the Aadhaar platform. It can be not only just an inclusive finance as it has been done, where all of the subsistence and assistance programs can be only secured through a bank account of some sort, but I think one can do a lot more. So livelihood-based entrepreneurship is very key. It has been shown by A1 Products, the cosmetic company in Amazon. I'm told that they actually have generated 1 million agents who sell modern cosmetics to the Amazon native people on the riverbeds. Think about that. A traditional native Amazon people wanting most modern cosmetics. We can do that thing. There is lots of opportunities in rural population. And the last one, and the as obvious and as critical, is infrastructure investment. My view is that infrastructure investment in rural will only happen with public-private partnership. We have done that thing with factories in the one time. If the sourcing raw material is in rural place, then we have invited factories to build their factories there, whether it's a cotton mill, for example, or it's some agricultural product. I don't know, whatever they are. Brazil has done enormous expansion of manufacturing in where the raw materials are. The British even built the railroads when they outsourced steel and textiles in America or all over the world. You put the factory where the raw material is, which is usually in rural population. So in manufacturing, we have done that thing. But I think today it can be done in also digitized products. So we need public-private partnership because government alone may not be good enough. Having the private discipline, private practice discipline, business sense about the whole thing, I think it can be done. And infrastructure design with a mission or an outcome is that its goal is economic development. How will it create a spark, not just a public service? It doesn't mean you don't do public service, but there's a built-in mechanism to create livelihood. It happens by market process. Can we do it on a planned basis? For example, every railway station in, let's say, Myanmar, even when I go, in Africa when I go, in India, once you go away from major metro, you see all the street vendors around there because that's a bazaar. That's where people come. They use the train all the time from suburbs to central, from rural to the urban population. And those train stations, you already have an informal market there, mostly cash-based. Can we create more organized approach to the whole thing? So infrastructure should be invested in a way it is meant not only for public service, but also creating economic livelihood multiplier. And most of the infrastructure I believe we build is not designed for go-to-market infrastructure. This is where you see the difference among nations. Some nations have decided that the real investment of infrastructure will be where you are making products in rural population. How do we make sure that it has a smooth logistics and supply chain for major metro markets? Whether those are mangoes in India, which I love, whether those are raw material cotton that goes to the cotton mill, for example, those are fruits and vegetables, fish, chicken, I don't care, whatever they are. So go-to-market infrastructure is very important. So let me conclude. Rural development in India is essential, I would say critical. Migration to cities is not a good option. What is needed is to provide economic livelihood and social programs in rural population. Rural people don't want to migrate to the cities. They do it out of sheer necessity. I'm from Kutch. In Kutch, have you seen the transformation made recently? In my generation, one family member left behind to take care of aging parents, a little shop, etc. Everybody else migrated to Mumbai, for example. All the Kutchi merchants are from Kutch in Mumbai, or migrated to Chennai, or migrated to Burma, migrated to America, wherever they went, because there was no livelihood there. Now what we are doing is to say, I can have you stay in the rural population and still actually have prosperity and wealth creating mechanism. If Amul can do it, anything else is possible. Contrary to popular belief, rural India contributes nearly 50% of the GDP, $1.2 trillion. It's not a small piece of chunk. It has the potential to contribute even more if the government, industry, and the NGOs reposition rural development, not from a subsidizing the rural poor people, but actually creating livelihood for them, or creating sustainability, or what I call self-reliant society. Rural development needs to reposition from government subsidies to self-reliant communities, and from unorganized markets to organized markets. And in my last slide, I have basically relisted again the 10 key strategic initiatives, starting with developing rural economies or cooperatives, to creating sustainable supply chain for rural sourcing, which is going to be very possible with e-commerce platforms in place today, investing into rural internet as a national objective, and digital literacy for all, absolutely universal literacy, digital side, not necessarily on reading, writing, and arithmetic, which is the industrial age revolution, but this is an information age revolution. And ultimately, unlocking rural entrepreneurship. I hope you enjoyed my presentation. Again, I'm so sorry I could not be there at the conference. Thank you very much.